On September 13th, 1987, two men walked down the road to an abandoned building in search of something valuable they heard was left inside. Unfortunately, they would find exactly what they were looking for. They had no way of knowing it at the time, but in doing so, they unleashed a disturbing chain of events that would go on to affect the lives of thousands of people. And even more horrifyingly, this would take the lives of some and literally disfigure others. This is their horrifying story, and as always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. For the previous few years, an old medical clinic down the street from Roberto's house had been caught in a legal dispute. Something between the building and the landowners and a long court case. It wasn't entirely clear. But until the dispute was resolved, a very valuable machine was abandoned there, or so Roberto had heard. Most of the building had already been torn down around it, leaving only a couple of crumbling rooms. So on the 13th of September, 1987, Roberto convinced a friend of his, Wagner, to go and take a look. They could really use the money after all, and it seemed to them that there might be something valuable worth finding. So that day, after making their way to the old clinic and then through the crumbling building, the two men found a strange machine. It had a large mechanical arm with a teardrop-shaped head. It also had a window on one side and looked expensive, exactly what they were hoping for. And after some work, the two men had the head in a wheelbarrow and brought it the half-kilometer back to Roberto's house, along with a few other scraps. There, they unscrewed a portion of the housing and found a pristine metallic cylinder inside. It had a large gear on one end and a smooth rotating head on the other, which lined up with a pair of windows, but sprang closed whenever they let go of it. It didn't seem to unscrew or come off though, so they figured the contents must have been very expensive and it seemed to need special tools to open. Whatever was inside it was probably worth it, but they could figure that out tomorrow. Both men were feeling sick from something they must have eaten. The next day on the 14th, Wagner wasn't feeling much better. In fact, he was actually feeling much worse. He was vomiting, lightheaded, and his left hand was swollen with a raw red mark in the middle of it. Despite this though, the two continued trying to disassemble the device until Wagner eventually called it quits after feeling too sick to continue. The following day, on the 15th, he went to a local clinic, this time one that was still operational, where they diagnosed an allergic reaction to something he'd eaten. The doctor then told Wagner to rest and take a few days to recover and only do light work. All in all, he'd be fine, they said. In the meantime, Roberto continued whittling away at the strange device and finally gave up trying to open it without breaking it. So jabbing a screwdriver into the glass, he was able to scoop out a small amount of powder from inside. It looked strange, and thinking it might be gunpowder, Roberto tested the dust with the lighter, but nothing happened. Afterwards, he managed to remove the rotating wheel so it would no longer snap closed on its own, but progress is slow. Another few days later, by the 18th, the cylinder was sitting under a tree in Roberto's backyard before being taken to a nearby scrap dealer named DeVere, who ran a business out of his house. DeVere also seemed to think it held some value because he paid $25 for it and set the cylinder aside. Later that evening, though, he noticed a strange blue glow from inside the cylinder. DeVere had never seen anything like it and took a piece of scrap inside to show his wife, Maria. It must have been far more valuable than he realized, or maybe even magical, whatever it was. For 3 days afterward, DeVere invited friends, family, and neighbors over to see the cylinder. He'd never seen something so exciting in a scrapyard before, and they'd never seen anything like it either. Two of DeVere's employees, Israel and Admilson, spent those few days trying to get it open, even though they were also feeling a little sick. Finally, on the 21st, another employee, Ernesto, managed to break the glass fully and pull rice grain-sized pieces out of the device. Most immediately crumbled to dust, but they still had that strange otherworldly glow. It was like the fine white powder had an aura to it, an almost halo-like radiance that extended beyond itself. No one had ever seen anything like it before. And thrilled with the discovery, DeVere started giving the powder to his friends and family as gifts. Who wouldn't want a pinch of magic powder or fairy dust? Ernesto even took another small crystal home that didn't crumble to make a ring for his wife. All said and done, they had about 93 grams of it in total, just shy of half a baking cup. And whatever it was free now. Maria then went on to decorate her pajamas and bedsheets with glowing dust that night. It wafted through the air, stuck to people's hands, got wiped onto pants legs. Then 2 days later, on the 23rd, Maria went to a clinic, vomiting, dizzy, and suffering from diarrhea. They again diagnosed her with a food allergy and sent her home to rest. When Maria's mother came over to look after her daughter, she walked through the house many times. Dust kicked up in people's footsteps, dissolved in water, stuck to people's clothes, and around the same time, Wagner was admitted to the hospital. The following day on the 24th, DeVere's brother Ivo came over and collected his share of the gift. That day, he took it home and gave the magical powder to his 6-year-old daughter, Lide. She loved the pretty pebbles her father brought home and played with them. She rubbed them on her skin, gave herself sparkling magical fingers, and when Ivo's sister Lucia came to visit, Lide wanted to show her too. Going along with his daughter's excitement, Ivo playfully said she'd make Lucia look beautiful and rubbed the glowing powder on her neck. A short while later, Lide ate with her hands still covered in the glowing dust, and she would begin throwing up not long after. Another person who came over, Dessen, held a pile of the dust in his hands and later went back to his work as a bus driver. He would then handle tickets from hundreds and hundreds of people and worked multiple buses on his coming shifts. The dust passed from fingers to paper, leather, and then back again, essentially following people home. In total, De Vere had at least 20 people over in the span of about a week. All of them were happy to play with his little treasure, but soon he too was feeling sick and had probably eaten whatever had made his wife feel so bad. On the 25th, De Vere sold the capsule itself to another scrap merchant. It was still a nice piece of metal after all, even without the dust. As the days passed though, more and more people kept getting sick, and they seemed to be getting worse. When Maria told her husband she suspected there was something wrong with the powder, he didn't believe her. Thankfully though, she didn't take no for an answer. On the 28th of September, Maria enlisted the help of one of her husband's employees, Geraldo, going over her husband's head. The two of them then scooped up as much of the powder as they could, brought back the pieces from the other scrapyard, and went to a local hospital. Maria then put the bag on the doctor's desk and told him it was killing her family. Initially, the doctor didn't find this likely. He then had Maria and Geraldo sent to a healthcare center where an examination diagnosed them with a tropical disease. The bag, however, still lay on the doctor's desk, and it unnerved him slightly. Maybe it was the insistence in her voice, or maybe a faint tingling in the back of his mind got to him. But either way, the doctor moved the bag outside to a chair sitting in a concrete courtyard, just in case. For Maria, after hours in waiting rooms talking to staff and taking tests, she might have worried her words had fallen on deaf ears once again. But thankfully, Maria wasn't the only person to notice something strange. Her doctor in the tropical disease wing began to think the lesions might be radiation burns, so he placed a phone call to one of his specialist contacts in the toxicology center looking for alternate explanations. On the call, he found out he wasn't the first person to call about these strange symptoms in Goiânia recently. In fact, he was told another doctor had mentioned the parts Maria had brought in looked like they could be broken X-ray equipment. This wasn't something anyone at the hospital was trying to deal with, and it was only just a theory, but there just so happened to be a medical physicist visiting Goiânia at the time. This physicist then agreed to come the following day and have a look at the equipment. The next morning, he stopped by a government geology office and asked to borrow one of their scintillometers. This is a sensitive tool used to find uranium ore deposits deep in the ground. A short while later, when he arrived at the hospital, he turned the meter on and it immediately registered the highest possible reading. He then confirmed this by facing different directions and turning the device off and on again, but nothing changed. Obviously, it had to be defective, he thought, so he returned to the office. Walter then got a second machine and turned this one on immediately, and it seemed to work fine. He then drove back to the hospital with the machine on the entire time, and as he got closer, the levels rose and rose until they couldn't go any higher. It was a good thing he made it back when he did too, because the first doctor who had seen Maria had grown more and more concerned with the mystery bag. He had actually called the fire department, whose plan was to throw it into the nearest river. Walter then frantically put a stop to their plan with only minutes to spare and took the scene under his authority, ordering a full evacuation of the hospital at 11 a.m. on the 29th. Phone calls then filtered higher and higher through the Brazilian government, and within hours, a team of specialists from the National Nuclear Commission had arrived at the city. They then confirmed that some sort of unsealed radioactive source was in Goiânia. By the end of the day, there would be hundreds more flown in, and the Brazilian army would be put on notice. It was later learned that the clinic Roberto and Wagner had broken into wasn't just a walk-in clinic. It was actually a radiotherapy clinic for treating cancer. The prize they'd taken, which was later cracked open, was the head and source capsule of a Cecipan F3000 radiotherapy device. It was designed by a company in Milan in the 1950s, and it was an aging machine, but one with a good suite of safety features. Like, for example, a spring-loaded shutter to seal off the capsule during a power outage, or a design that required specialty tools to open it so that no one did so accidentally. These were features which horrifically were rendered useless by people simply not knowing what it was, and encouraged because of a beautiful glow inside. The shimmering dust, which had captured everyone's eyes and sparked the imagination of children, was actually cesium-137. This is a byproduct of uranium decay, either natural or artificial, and one of the more insidious kinds of nuclear waste on Earth. It's water-soluble, sneaking into mud, soil, cracks in skin, and settles mostly in the body's muscles once it makes its way inside. From there, it continues to irradiate the victim for long periods of time until leaving the body via sweat or excretion. And since it's just a salt, the body doesn't even recognize it as a threat. When doctors arrived at De Vere's household around noon, just an hour after the radiation had first been identified, they convinced the rest of the family to leave. By just nightfall on the same day, the city's Olympic Stadium had been converted into a massive triage center and staging ground for citizens to be checked, decontaminated, and isolated for medical observation. 112,000 people would then be cycled through the stadium in the following days. Meanwhile, a helicopter and a car mounted with detectors moved through the city, taking measurements until the main sources of contamination could all be mapped, evacuated, and liquidated. The city of Goiânia had a population of just shy of 1 million people at the time. Response team members then began interviewing patients and people they identified as contaminated about where they'd been, who they had interacted with, and contact traced others who might be affected. It was learned that passing from hand to hand, through the air, and on the surface of objects, the cesium had blanketed vast portions of the city in just about 2 weeks. In fact, 85 houses were found with harmful levels of radioactive contamination, with 7 having to be demolished rather than cleaned. A further 45 more public spaces also had serious contamination, and the hospital needed to be intricately cleaned. And finally, 14 personal cars, 3 buses, and 5 unfortunate pigs all had to be destroyed. To secure the capsule itself in the courtyard of the hospital, a section of concrete pipe was lowered over it with a crane and then filled with concrete, sealing away the bag, the chair, and most of the source altogether. And beyond that, in the coming months, 275 truckloads of waste were removed, massive amounts of topsoil, building rubble, water runoff, personal items, pets, and furniture. In total, the waste would have filled 1.5 Olympic swimming pools. And this was all from a small pile of powder that could fit comfortably in the palm of your hand, yet also kill you without you even noticing. And the human toll was similarly high, but it could have been far worse if not for Maria stepping forward on her own right when she thought something was wrong. During a screening at the stadium, around 1,000 people were estimated to have received a full year's worth of radiation in just the past 2 weeks. 249 were directly contaminated, and 22 showed symptoms of acute radiation sickness, most of whom were direct relatives or friends of the family. And sadly, even with the radiation's discovery, it would be too late for several of the victims. On the 23rd of October, Lide, the enthusiastic 6-year-old, would pass away. She would be followed later that same day by her Aunt Maria. Then on the 27th and 28th, the 2 workers at De Vere's scrapyard, Israel and Admilson, would join them. And those who survived were not untouched either. Just 93 grams of cesium-137 gives off an enormous amount of radiation. This equates to tens of trillions of bursts of energy every second. And to put that into perspective, that's more than 1 burst for every single cell in the human body. Each one of these bursts is like a tiny invisible bullet of energy shooting out in a random direction. And as for the strange blue glow itself, that is something known as Cherenkov radiation. It apparently happens when particles move faster than light can travel through water or glass, and is most commonly seen glowing in the pools that cool nuclear reactors. As a result of all of this, holding it in your hand would have been like being jabbed with billions of microscopic needles that you couldn't feel until hours or years later when cell death or cancer caught up with you. And for those who had even closer contact with it, the symptoms are horrific. Lucia, who had the powder rubbed in her neck, had her skin peel off, while Geraldo, who carried the bag of parts on his shoulder, burned a hole in his back. Wagner, meanwhile, lost multiple fingers from trying to open the source capsule, and Roberto lost most of his right arm. What had seemed like an innocent or even beautiful and magical toy had been like a curse instead. And beyond just the physical effects, people were scared of it. In fact, when it came time to bury Lide, over 2,000 people came out and rioted. They blocked the road, fearing that her body would poison the earth, in spite of a special fiberglass and lead coffin, which would be forever sealed in several tons of concrete. Others who were involved were even ostracized from the community. Like, for example, Odessin, the bus driver, and his family were prevented from moving into other neighborhoods in Goiânia. And Goiânia itself was also shunned. Produce from the state was boycotted, and taxi drivers and even airline pilots would refuse to take people to the city. Although it was cleaned, the haunting specter of the radiation loomed over the city for years. And it loomed inside some more than others. De Vere had only wanted to share something beautiful with his family and friends. He died in 1994 from liver failure after drinking in excess through 7 years of emotional turmoil. Meanwhile, Ivo died of emphysema in 2005, a disease often associated with smoking, but also a possible effect of some lung cancers. One of the few positive things that can be said about the incident is that it could have been much, much worse. Maria's last major action in life brought it to the attention of authorities, and those authorities moved quickly. In the span of just a few days, all unnecessary exposure had been stopped, the contamination contained, and just 6 months later, eliminated entirely. All of this from a community which didn't even have an action plan for a radiological disaster when it started. Today, Goiânia's cancer rates aren't even abnormally high. Some groups estimate anywhere from 25 to 70 cancer-related deaths, which over the course of nearly 40 years may as well be a miracle with how high it could have just as easily turned out. To this day, the International Atomic Energy Agency considers Goiânia the closest real-life case for what an attack with a dirty bomb would look like. It actually continues to use it as a training scenario, helping prepare agencies for similar emergencies and learning from shortcomings along the way. Goiânia also remains one of only 4 international nuclear Scale 5 events in history, placing it among the top 7 nuclear accidents of all time. Odessin, the bus driver, has also taken the incident to heart. He's currently the president of the Association of Cesium Victims of Goiânia, an agency with 1,600 members who continue to advocate for compensation and medical treatment in the Brazilian legal system. In 2017, he received an honorary Lifetime Achievement Award for his advocacy at the Uranium Film Festival. And as for the machine itself, one of the reasons Odessin needs to fight for people's compensation, though, is the real tragedy of Goiânia. In 1986, the owner of the cancer center where the machine had been taken from told the courts about its presence and that he wanted to remove it and get it somewhere safe. However, tragically, he was denied pending the outcome of the legal dispute. And so, that is where it remained until it was found and taken on that fateful day. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. If you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it to the forum found in the description. Also, if you want to support the channel, consider joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member here on YouTube. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.